The marble floor gleamed like frozen moonlight, beneath a ceiling dripping with crystal flames. The trial hall stretched vast and merciless, every corner carved from ancient stone that had witnessed 1,000 submissions. Tonight, it would witness one more, or so they thought. 60 women stood in a perfect line, barefoot and trembling in ceremonial whites that clung to their skin like surrender. Around them, the assembled packs watched from tiered balconies, their eyes glowing faintly in the candlelight, wolves dressed as nobility, judging prey dressed as brides. This was the mating trial, the sacred hunt, the moment where bloodlines were tested, weaknesses exposed, and futures decided under the cold gaze of the winter moon. Myra Hawks should never have been here. Her dress hung loose on her starved frame, the fabric nearly translucent, where sweat had begun to soak through. Her wrists bore faint purple shadows, bruises from the servants who'd accidentally tied her bindings too tight that morning. She hadn't eaten a full meal in 6 days. Lady Deborah had made certain of that. "Keep your chin up," Ellen had whispered before they were separated at the entrance. "Don't give her the satisfaction." But satisfaction was all Lady Deborah wanted. From her perch in the noble gallery, Myra's guardian sat perfectly still, her smile thin as a blade, her eyes fixed on the girl she'd spent 18 years trying to erase. The trial master raised his staff. The hall fell silent. Let the proving begin. The air thickened. Something ancient stirred beneath the stone. Power, ritual, the weight of 1,000 years pressing down on fragile human spines. One by one, the candidates stepped forward into the circle of judgment, their movements monitored, their sense analyzed, their endurance measured like cattle at auction. Myra felt the heat rising, not from the chandeliers, from something deeper, something wrong. Her vision blurred at the edges. Not yet, not here, not in front of everyone. She clenched her fists until her nails bit into her palms, using the pain to anchor herself. But her knees had other plans. They buckled without warning, and suddenly the floor was rushing up to meet her, the gasps of the crowd crashing over her like a wave. And then she stopped. She didn't hit the ground. Strong arms caught her mid-fall, lifting her as if she weighed nothing at all. The world tilted, and when her vision cleared just enough to focus, she found herself staring up into a face carved from fury and ice. The Alpha King. Harold Landry stood at the center of the trial hall, having moved faster than any human eye could track. His long black hair fell over his shoulders like a warrior's banner, his dark coat embroidered with the silver crest of the crown. Chains hung across his chest, marks of rank, of dominance, of a man who had never asked permission for anything in his life. His eyes were molten gold, fixed on her face with an intensity that burned. The hall had gone deathly silent. "She's mine!"
She's mine.
His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It cut through the stillness like a blade through silk, absolute and unyielding. Shock rippled through the room. Nobles leaned forward, guards tensed. From the gallery above, Lady Deborah's perfect composure finally cracked, near her face draining of color. The trial master stammered, "Your Majesty, the ritual isn't complete. She hasn't been evaluated." "I said she's mine." Harold's gaze never left Myra's face. His arms tightened around her, protective and possessive in equal measure, and for the first time in her life, Myra felt something she'd never known before. Safety. It terrified her, because men like Harold Landry didn't catch girls like her, didn't claim them in front of the entire realm, didn't look at them like they were the only thing in the room worth seeing. And yet here she was, limp in his arms, her heart pounding against his chest, the winter moon blazing through the skylight above them like a spotlight on the impossible. The Alpha King had chosen, and nothing would ever be the same. Hello, everyone. Before we go further with today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's return to our main character. The trial was never mercy. Myra had known 3 things for certain before tonight. 1. Lady Deborah hated her with a precision that felt almost artistic. 2. The mating trial was designed to break the weak, and Myra had been systematically weakened for weeks. 3. She was not meant to survive this. The preparation had begun at dawn. No food, no water. Only Ellen's trembling hands braiding Myra's hair, while the other servants pretended not to notice the bruises, the hollow cheeks, the way Myra's fingers shook as she dressed. "She's going to kill you," Ellen had whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of Lady Deborah's footsteps in the corridor outside. "Not quickly, not obviously, but she's going to make sure you don't walk out of that hall tonight." Myra had nodded. She'd known. Of course she'd known. What she hadn't known was why. Lady Deborah wasn't just cruel. Cruelty was common among the nobility, practically a currency. But Deborah's treatment of Myra went beyond sport. It was methodical, calculated, like she was trying to snuff out a fire that no one else could see. "Maybe she'll get bored," Myra had said weakly, though neither of them believed it. Ellen had gripped her hand so tightly it hurt. "If you feel yourself falling, grab onto something, anything. Don't let them see you break." But there had been nothing to grab onto when her knees gave out in the trial hall. Nothing except the Alpha King. Now, as consciousness flickered back into her body, Myra became aware of 3 new things. 1. She was no longer on the marble floor. 2. She was being carried, still being carried, through corridors that smelled of old stone and burning sage. 3. The Alpha King had not put her down. Voices swirled around her, sharp and frantic. "Your Majesty, the council will demand an explanation. She hasn't been cleared by the healers. My lord, if I may, the propriety of—" "Get out of my way!" Harold's voice was a low growl that made the protest die instantly. Myra felt the rumble of it through his chest, felt the way his arms tightened just slightly when someone stepped too close. She should say something, should move, should prove she wasn't completely helpless. But her body was a traitor, and her mind was still spinning from the impossible reality of what had just happened. He claimed me. In front of everyone, he claimed me. The movement stopped. A door opened with a heavy creak. "My king, she needs—" "I know what she needs." Another door, softer this time. Then the sensation of being lowered onto something impossibly soft, silk sheets that smelled like lavender and winter night air. Myra's eyes finally cracked open. She was in a bedroom. No, not a bedroom. A tower room. Circular walls lined with tall windows that showed nothing but darkness and stars. A fireplace roared in the corner, casting everything in warm, flickering gold. The bed beneath her was larger than any room she'd ever slept in, and standing at the foot of it, backlit by firelight, was the Alpha King. He hadn't moved away, hadn't summoned servants or healers. He just stood there, watching her with that same burning intensity from the trial hall, his hands still curled into fists at his sides, like he was restraining himself from reaching for her again. "You're awake," he said quietly. Myra's throat was dry. Her voice came out as barely a rasp. "You caught me." "Yes." "You claimed me." "Yes." She stared at him, trying to make sense of it, trying to find the trick or the trap or the reason. "Why?" Harold's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, slowly, he moved closer, so stopping at the edge of the bed. His golden eyes never left hers. "Because," he said, his voice rough and low, "the moment you stepped into that hall, I felt it. The bond. The pull. The absolute certainty that if I didn't reach you first, I would burn this entire palace to the ground." Myra's breath caught. "I don't know who you are," Harold continued, "or what you are, but you're mine, and I will kill anyone who tries to take you from me." The firelight danced across his face, casting shadows that made him look even more dangerous, more feral. But beneath the threat, beneath the dominance, there was something else. Recognition. Like he'd been waiting for her. Like he'd known her before she ever walked into that hall. And as Myra lay there, trembling and starved and terrified, the one thought crystallized with brutal clarity. Her life had just become infinitely more dangerous. Because the Alpha King didn't just want her. He needed her. And someone, Lady Deborah, had spent 18 years making sure this moment would never happen. The question was, why? The feeling had started before Myra even entered the trial hall, a prickling at the back of her neck, a weight in the air that had nothing to do with the ceremony's solemnity or the watching crowd. It felt like being tracked, like something with teeth had caught her scent and was deciding whether to pounce or savor the anticipation. Ellen had noticed her falter at the entrance. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," Myra lied, because how could she explain that every instinct she possessed was screaming at her to run? That despite never having shifted, despite being told her entire life she was human and powerless, something ancient in her blood recognized predator when it walked into a room? The trial master had called them forward, and Myra had forced herself to move with the other candidates. But that sensation never left. If anything, it intensified as they formed their line on the marble floor, as the packed galleries filled with nobility and witnesses, as the ceremony began in earnest. She could feel eyes on her, not the general observation of the crowd. This was specific, targeted. A gaze so intense it felt physical, like fingers trailing down her spine. Don't look. Don't give them a reason to notice you more than they already have. But her traitorous body didn't listen. Her head turned almost of its own accord, scanning the elevated throne platform at the far end of the hall. And she found him. The Alpha King sat perfectly still in a throne carved from black stone and silver, elevated above even the highest nobles. He wasn't participating in the idle chatter around him, wasn't pretending to be entertained by the spectacle. He was simply watching her. Harold Landry was everything the rumors promised, and worse. Tall enough that even seated he dominated the space around him, broad-shouldered beneath a coat of layered black fabric that caught the light like armor. Heavy chains crossed his chest, each link thick as Myra's thumb, bearing the royal crest in polished silver. His hair was long and dark, falling past his shoulders in waves that somehow looked both wild and deliberate, like he could have been civilized if he chose, but saw no reason to pretend. His face was all sharp angles, strong jaw darkened by stubble, an intense brow that made every glance feel like judgment. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath. Even across the vast distance of the hall, she could see them glowing faintly gold, reflecting firelight like a wolf's eyes caught in the dark. And they were fixed on her with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. He didn't blink, didn't look away, just stared at her like she was the only person in the room, like the 60 other candidates in white might as well have been ghosts, like the entire assembled court had ceased to exist the moment she'd crossed the threshold. His nostrils flared slightly. His hands tightened on the arms of his throne, fingers curling until his knuckles went white. "He can smell me from there," Myra realized with growing horror. "He knows I'm different. He knows I don't belong." But that wasn't quite right. The expression on Harold's face wasn't disgust or contempt. It was something far more dangerous. Recognition. Like he'd been waiting for her. Like he'd known her before she ever walked into this hall. A sharp elbow to her ribs snapped Myra back to reality. One of the other candidates hissed at her. "Face forward, you fool! Do you want to fail before it even begins?" Myra jerked her gaze away, heart hammering. But she could still feel it. That weight, that attention, burning into her like a brand. Harold Landry hadn't looked away. Even as the trial master began the ceremonial announcements, even as the first candidates stepped forward for evaluation, the Alpha King's focus never wavered. He watched her like a predator watches prey, or like a man who'd finally found something he'd been hunting for a very long time. The ritual heat began to build. Myra felt it spreading through the marble beneath her feet, through the air itself, a pressure that made the other candidates shift and whimper. It was designed to test endurance, to separate the weak from the worthy, to push them until only the strongest remained standing. Myra had no chance. She'd known that from the beginning. Lady Deborah had made certain of it. 3 days of starvation didn't just weaken the body, it made every sensation sharper, every discomfort excruciating. The heat that should have been merely uncomfortable felt like standing in a furnace. Her vision swam. Her legs trembled. Sweat soaked through her thin dress until it clung to her like a second skin, and she heard the whispers start in the galleries. Is that girl going to make it? She looks half dead already. Whose ward is she? Lady Deborah's, I think. The charity case. The words washed over her like poison. Myra tried to focus, tried to use the pain in her palms where her nails bit into flesh as an anchor, but her body was shutting down. She'd pushed too far, endured too much, and now there was nothing left. The marble floor tilted beneath her feet. No, not yet. Not here. Not in front of. Her knees buckled. The gasps from the crowd hit her like a wave as she fell, the world spinning into chaos. She had a single moment to brace for the impact of cold stone, for the humiliation of failing so publicly, for whatever punishment would come after. And then she stopped. Strong arms caught her mid-fall, wrapping around her back and beneath her knees, lifting her as if she weighed nothing at all. The world steadied. The scent of winter pine and smoke filled her lungs. Harold Landry held her against his chest, having moved from his throne to the center of the hall, faster than any human eye should have been able to track. The trial hall fell into a silence so complete, Myra could hear her own heartbeat. She forced her eyes open, found herself staring up at a face carved from fury and ice. The Alpha King looked down at her with those burning gold eyes, and something in his expression made her breath catch. It wasn't pity, it wasn't even kindness, it was possession. "She's mine," Harold said, his voice cutting through the stillness like a blade. Chaos erupted. Nobles shot to their feet. The trial master stammered something about protocol. Guards tensed. See hands moving to weapons they didn't dare draw. But Harold didn't move. He stood at the center of it all, holding Myra like she was something precious and breakable, his arms a cage she couldn't have escaped even if she'd had the strength to try. "Your Majesty," the trial master began, his voice shaking. "The ritual isn't complete. She hasn't been evaluated. We don't even know if she's—" "I said she's mine." Harold's voice dropped lower, dangerous. "Is there anyone here who would like to contest that claim?" No one spoke. No one moved, except Lady Deborah. Myra saw her guardian rise from her seat in the noble gallery, her movements controlled and precise, despite the shock that had blanched her face. Deborah descended the stairs with practiced grace, her dark velvet dress whispering against stone, her expression settling back into that familiar mask of cold authority. "Your Majesty," Deborah said, her voice honey-sweet and laced with poison. "Surely there's been some mistake. The girl is my ward, a human, a servant, hardly suitable for—" "Your ward." Harold's gaze finally left Myra's face, lifting to pin Deborah with a look that could have frozen fire. "Tell me, Lady Deborah, is it customary in your house to starve your dependents before public ceremonies?" Deborah's smile didn't falter, but something flickered in her eyes. "I'm sure I don't know what your Majesty means." 3 days. Harold's arms tightened almost imperceptibly around Myra. "She hasn't eaten properly in 3 days. Her wrists bear ligature marks. Her dress was chosen specifically to humiliate." His voice dropped to something barely above a whisper, but it carried to every corner of the hall. "Did you think I wouldn't notice? Did you think I wouldn't smell what you've done to her?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Deborah's mask finally cracked. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Your Majesty, I assure you, if there were any oversights in her care, they were certainly not intentional. The girl is prone to dramatics, to—" Enough. The word cracked like a whip. Harold turned his back on Deborah with such finality it was its own form of dismissal, a public humiliation that would ripple through the court for months. This trial is over. Anyone who has objections to my claim can bring them to the council tomorrow. Until then, she stays with me. He started walking, carrying Myra as if the conversation had concluded, because he'd decided it had. The crowd parted before him like water, nobles stumbling over themselves to get out of his way. Myra caught a glimpse of Lady Deborah's face as they passed, saw the fury there, the fear, and something else, something that looked almost like panic. She didn't expect this, Myra realized through the haze of exhaustion and shock. She planned for me to fail, to be rejected, maybe even to die. But she never planned for this. The massive doors of the trial hall swung open at Harold's approach, and then they were in the corridor beyond, his footsteps echoing on ancient stone as he carried her deeper into the palace. Servants and guards scattered. Voices called after them. Advisors, protocols, demands for explanations. But Harold ignored them all. Your Majesty, the council will demand. Let them demand. She hasn't been cleared by the healers. I'll clear her myself. My lord, the propriety of... Get out of my way. His voice was a growl that made the protests die instantly. Myra felt the rumble of it through his chest, felt the way his arms tightened just slightly whenever anyone stepped too close, like he was already prepared to fight anyone who tried to take her from him. She should say something, should ask what was happening, where they were going, what he meant by claiming her. But her tongue felt too heavy, her thoughts too scattered, and part of her was terrified that if she spoke, if she moved, the dream, or nightmare, would shatter, and she'd wake on the cold marble floor with Lady Deborah standing over her. They climbed stairs, many stairs, higher and higher into the palace until the sounds of the court faded to nothing and the air grew cooler, touched with the scent of night wind. A door opened, then another, heavier one, and then Harold was lowering her onto something impossibly soft. Silk sheets that smelled like lavender and winter night air. A bed larger than any room she'd ever slept in. Myra's eyes struggled to focus, taking in her surroundings in fragments. A circular room with tall windows showing nothing but stars and darkness. Stone walls hung with tapestries. A fireplace roaring in the corner, casting everything in warm, flickering gold. The furnishings were sparse but rich. A desk, shelves of books, weapons mounted on the walls like art. This wasn't a guest room. This was his room. Harold stepped back from the bed, but didn't leave. He stood at the foot of it, silhouetted by firelight, his hands curled into fists at his sides, like he was physically restraining himself from reaching for her again. His chest rose and fell with slightly too rapid breaths, and his eyes, gods, his eyes were still locked on her with that same burning intensity. "Stay here," he commanded, then seemed to catch himself. His jaw tightened. "Please, just stay here. I'll send for the healer." He turned toward the door, every movement controlled, and Myra's mouth moved before her mind could catch up. "Why?" Harold stopped. Slowly, he looked back at her over his shoulder. "Why did you catch me?" Myra's voice was barely a whisper, raw and confused. "Why did you claim me? I'm nothing. I'm nobody. I'm not even—" "You felt it." It wasn't a question. Harold turned fully to face her, and the firelight made his features look even sharper, more dangerous. "The moment you walked into that hall, you felt it. The pull. The recognition. Tell me I'm wrong." Myra's breath caught. Because he wasn't wrong, she'd felt something, that weight, that attention, that inexplicable sense of being known by someone she'd never met. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Neither do I." Harold moved closer, stopping at the edge of the bed. His voice dropped lower, rougher. "I don't know who you are or what you are, but the bond is there. My wolf recognized you the moment your scent hit the air. And if that haul had lasted another minute, if you'd collapsed and someone else had reached you first, I would have torn them apart." He said it so calmly, so matter-of-factly, that it took a moment for the words to register. Myra stared at him, trying to process the impossible reality of what he was saying. "That's insane," she managed. "Yes." Harold's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Welcome to my world." Before Myra could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door. Harold's expression shifted back to cold authority in an instant. "Enter." The door opened to reveal a woman in deep-toned robes, carrying a leather satchel that marked her as a healer. She was older, maybe 50, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a practical braid and eyes that saw too much. Her face was calm, unremarkable, but she moved with the quiet confidence of someone who'd earned their authority through competence rather than rank. "Your Majesty," she said, inclining her head. Her gaze shifted to Myra, and something flickered in those observant eyes. Recognition? Surprise? It was gone too quickly to name. "I'm Peggy, the royal healer. May I examine your guest?" "She's not a guest," Harold said flatly. "She's mine. And yes, examine her. Then tell me who did this to her." Peggy moved to the bedside with practiced efficiency, setting her satchel down and pulling out various implements. A small lantern, glass vials, strips of cloth. Her hands were steady and gentle as she began her examination, checking Myra's pulse, her eyes, the bruises on her wrists. Harold watched from the shadows near the fireplace, his presence a constant weight in the room. "Severe malnutrition," Peggy announced after several minutes, her tone clinical. "Dehydration. These bruises are recent, within the last 24 hours. There's evidence of long-term deprivation as well. This didn't happen overnight." She lifted her gaze to Harold. "Someone has been systematically weakening her for weeks, possibly months." "Lady Deborah," Myra whispered, because there was no point in hiding it now. "Your guardian?" Peggy's expression didn't change, but her hands gentled even further as she continued her examination. "How long has she been restricting your food?" "Years. But the last few weeks were worse," she said. Myra's voice trailed off. What had Deborah said? That Myra needed to learn her place? That she was being punished for existing? She said what? Harold's voice came from the shadows, dangerously soft. "That I deserved it," Myra finished quietly. The silence that followed was broken only by the crackling of the fire. Then Harold moved, stalking across the room with predatory grace until he stood beside the bed again. He didn't touch her, but Myra could feel the rage radiating off him in waves. "No one will touch you again," he said. And it sounded like a vow, like a promise written in blood. Peggy cleared her throat diplomatically. "Your Majesty, if I might continue? The girl needs food, but her system won't tolerate much at first. I'll need to build her strength back gradually, starting with broth and soft foods. Too much too quickly could make her sick." "Then do it," Harold ordered. "Whatever she needs, it's hers." "There's one more thing." Peggy's hands had moved to Myra's throat, fingers pressing gently against the pulse point. Her expression shifted, became sharper, more focused. "Your Majesty, I'll need to speak with you privately." "Speak plainly. She deserves to hear whatever you've found." Peggy hesitated, then nodded slowly. "As you wish." She turned back to Myra, those observant eyes meeting hers directly. "You're not human. Child!" The words dropped into the room like stones into still water. Myra blinked. What?" "You're not human," Peggy repeated, her voice gentle but firm. "You should have shifted by now. Your body has all the markers of wolf blood, but something is blocking it, something deliberate." Her fingers pressed more firmly against Myra's throat, and Myra felt a strange tingling sensation. "There's a binding woven into your blood, Old magic. Very old. Someone didn't want you to shift, didn't want you to access whatever power you carry. The room spun. Myra heard the words but couldn't make them make sense. Not human. Bound. Power. That's impossible, she whispered. Lady Deborah said. Lady Deborah lied. Harold's voice was ice. The question is why? Peggy withdrew her hands, but her expression remained troubled. The binding is starting to crack. The stress of the trial, the near-death state, She glanced at Harold meaningfully. Mate bond. All of it is putting pressure on whatever seal was placed on her. And when it breaks... When it breaks, Harold prompted. I don't know, Peggy admitted. But whatever is locked inside her, it's powerful enough that someone went to extraordinary lengths to keep it contained. You need to be prepared for that, Your Majesty. Harold nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving Myra's face. Then we prepare. In the meantime, she eats, she rests, and she stays here where I can protect her. The council won't like that, Peggy warned. The council can adjust their expectations. Peggy packed her instruments with practiced efficiency, gave Myra one last meaningful look, and departed with a whispered promise to return with food. The door clicked shut, leaving Myra alone with the Alpha King and impossible revelations. Not human, Myra repeated, testing the words. They felt foreign in her mouth. She said, I'm not human. No, Harold agreed quietly. You're not. He moved closer, sinking into a chair beside the bed with fluid grace. I knew the moment I scented you. Human doesn't smell like spring rain and moonlight. Human doesn't make a wolf's instincts howl to claim, protect mine. Myra's hands twisted in the silk sheets. Then what am I? That, Harold said, is what we're going to find out. But first, you need to sleep. You need to eat. You need to stop looking at me like I'm going to hurt you. Are you? The question slipped out before Myra could stop it. Harold's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Never. You're mine to protect now, Myra Hawks. That means the only thing anyone will hurt is my corpse on the way to reaching you. It should have sounded possessive, controlling. Instead, it sounded like safety. Myra's eyes grew heavy despite her best efforts to stay alert, to process everything that had happened. The last thing she saw before exhaustion claimed her was Harold settling into the chair, positioning himself between her and the door like a sentinel, like he meant to stand guard all night. And maybe, she thought as consciousness slipped away, maybe that wasn't such a terrible thing. Morning brought voices, angry voices, getting closer, building in volume until they penetrated even the thick walls of the tower room. Myra stirred, so disoriented by the softness of the bed, by the unfamiliar warmth of the fire that had been tended through the night. Harold still sat in the chair beside her, though his posture had shifted from relaxed to combat-ready. His eyes were fixed on the door, and the expression on his face promised violence. They're here, he said without looking at her. The council. They've been gathering since dawn, working themselves into a righteous fury. His lips curved into something cold and sharp. Let them. The door burst open without so much as a knock. 6 men in formal council robes swept into the room, led by a tall figure with silver hair and a face that combined aristocratic breeding with calculated cruelty. Lord Geoffrey, Myra recognized from court portraits, head of the council, master of political maneuvering, and from the look on his face, currently furious. Your Majesty, Geoffrey said, his voice dripping false courtesy, we need to discuss last night's incident. There was no incident, Harold replied, not rising from his chair. There was a claiming. You were all witnesses. A claiming. Geoffrey's smile was thin as a blade. Of a human. A servant. Without consultation, without proper evaluation, without any regard for tradition or protocol. I wasn't aware I needed permission from the council to recognize my mate. The word mate sent a ripple through the assembled nobles. Several exchanged glances. One muttered something under his breath. Geoffrey's smile never wavered. Your Majesty, we all respect the mate bond when it occurs between appropriate parties. But this girl... He gestured dismissively toward Myra, who's not bothering to look at her directly. She's not wolf blood, she's human. The claiming is invalid under pack law. She's not human, Harold said flatly. That brought Geoffrey up short. Excuse me? The royal healer examined her last night. She's wolf blood, bound and suppressed, but wolf blood nonetheless. Which means the claiming stands. Geoffrey's expression flickered. Surprise, calculation, annoyance. Even if that's true, and I reserve the right to require independent verification, the matter of her station remains. She's a servant, Your Majesty. The future queen cannot be... Cannot be what? Harold's voice dropped to something dangerous. A survivor? Someone who endured years of abuse and still has the strength to stand in that hall. Someone my wolf recognized instantly as mine? Someone, Geoffrey said coldly, with no name. See, no lineage, no political connections to strengthen the realm. Your Majesty, the position of queen is not simply a romantic notion. It's a political necessity. The packs are already restless after the border conflicts. We need alliances, not... Careful, Harold interrupted softly. Think very carefully about how you finish that sentence. Geoffrey had the sense to pause, but his eyes glittered with barely suppressed fury. Behind him, the other council members shifted uncomfortably. One of them, an older man with kind eyes and weathered features, stepped forward. Your Majesty, perhaps a compromise? The young lady could remain here as your guest, while we conduct a proper investigation into her lineage. 30 days should be sufficient to... 30 days. Harold considered this, his fingers drumming once against the arm of the chair. To investigate her lineage and verify the healer's findings? Precisely. And during that time, the young lady would be free to adjust to palace life, to make her own decision about whether she wishes to accept the bond. That drew Harold's attention fully. He looked at the older councilman with something approaching respect. You're suggesting she have a choice in this, Councilman Peter? I'm suggesting, Peter said carefully, that a claiming made while the young lady was unconscious and traumatized might benefit from conscious ratification. If the mate bond is genuine, 30 days should only strengthen it. And if it's not, he spread his hands diplomatically. Myra had been silent through the entire exchange, watching the men discuss her fate as if she were a piece of property to be bargained over. But that last statement, that suggestion that she might have a choice, made something inside her snap. I'm right here, she said. Every eye in the room turned to her. Most of them looked surprised she could speak. Myra pushed herself upright despite her body's protests, meeting Geoffrey's cold gaze directly. I'm right here, sitting in this bed, listening to you discuss me like I'm a horse you're evaluating for purchase. So perhaps someone should ask me what I want. Geoffrey's expression could have curdled milk. Young lady, you should be grateful. Grateful? Myra's voice remained quiet, but something in it made Geoffrey falter. Grateful that I was starved and humiliated and nearly killed, only to be claimed by a man I've never spoken to in front of an entire court? Grateful that I'm now at the center of a political battle I don't understand? Grateful that not one person in this room has asked if I'm all right? The silence that followed was profound. She's magnificent, Harold murmured, and there was something almost like pride in his voice. Myra turned her attention to him, this alpha king who'd caught her, claimed her, and now watched her face down his counsel with barely suppressed delight. You want 30 days? Fine. 30 days where I'm not your property, not your mate, not your anything except a person making a choice. Can you give me that? Harold's golden eyes held hers, and for a moment the rest of the room ceased to exist. Yes, he said simply, but I need you to understand something. There's a reason for the timeline. The winter moon is in 28 days. Whatever binding is on you, whatever power you're carrying, it's connected to the lunar cycle. When the moon goes full again, it's going to break whether we're ready or not. Break how? We don't know, Harold admitted. But Peggy says you'll need an anchor when it happens. Someone to ground you, to help you control whatever awakens. That's what the mate bond provides. Without it, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. So, I have 30 days to decide if I want to be bound to you or risk losing myself entirely to whatever power some unnamed person locked inside me, Myra said flatly. Those are my options. Or, Harold said quietly, you spend the 30 days getting to know me, letting me prove that the bond isn't a cage, that I'm not Lady Deborah with a crown, that choosing me doesn't mean losing yourself. He stood, moving to the window, giving her space. I won't force you, Myra. The claiming in the hall was instinct, my wolf moving before my human mind could catch up. But everything after this moment, that's your choice. Lord Geoffrey looked like he'd swallowed something bitter. Your Majesty, this is highly irregular. Then it's fortunate, Harold said, still gazing out the window, that I am the king, and irregularity is my prerogative. Myra Hawks will remain here under my protection. She will have access to the royal healers, proper food, clothes, anything she needs. The council will conduct their investigation, and in 30 days, she'll make her choice. He turned back, pinning Geoffrey with a look. Unless you'd like to challenge me directly, Geoffrey, because I promise you, I would welcome that conversation. Geoffrey's jaw worked silently for a moment. Then he bowed, stiff and shallow. As your Majesty commands, but the council will be watching, closely. They always are. Harold's tone made it clear the discussion was over. Now get out, all of you. She needs to eat, and your presence is disturbing the peace. The council filed out, Geoffrey shooting one last venomous look at Myra before the door closed behind him. Only Councilman Peter paused at the threshold, offering Myra a small, genuine smile before departing. The door clicked shut. Myra let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. That man wants me dead. Geoffrey wants everyone dead who threatens his power, Harold agreed, which currently includes both of us. Welcome to court politics. This is insane. Yes. Harold returned to the chair, but this time he sat facing her more openly, less like a guard and more like an equal. For what it's worth, you handled that beautifully. Geoffrey isn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone he considers beneath him. I'm not beneath anyone, Myra said quietly. No, Harold agreed, you're not. Which is why you're going to make a magnificent queen. I haven't agreed to be your queen. Not yet. His smile was small, genuine. But you have 30 days to change your mind. Before Myra could respond, there was another knock. This one gentle. Peggy entered with a tray of food that smelled like heaven. Warm broth, soft bread, honey, fruit. She set it on the table beside the bed with practiced care. Start with the broth, she instructed. Small sips. Your stomach needs to adjust gradually. Myra reached for the bowl with trembling hands, the first real food she'd had in days. The warm liquid hit her tongue, and she nearly sobbed from the simple relief of it. Peggy watched her eat with those observant eyes, then exchanged a meaningful glance with Harold. Your Majesty, there's something else you should know. The binding on the girl. It's cracking faster than I initially thought. The stress of the claiming, the mate bond forming, it's accelerating the process. How much time before it breaks completely? Harold asked. Days, maybe a week. Certainly not 30 days. Peggy's expression was grave. Whatever is coming, it's coming soon. Harold nodded slowly. Then we prepare. Peggy, I need you to research everything we have on bindings, on suppressed power, on luminaries, Peggy said quietly. The word hung in the air like smoke. What? Myra lowered the bowl, her heart suddenly pounding. Peggy moved closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The marks on your wrists, the pattern of the binding, the way your power feels. I've seen this before. In very old texts, before the purges. She met Myra's eyes directly. Child, I think you're luminary blood. That's impossible, Myra breathed. Luminaries are extinct. They were wiped out during the Dark Wars. Everyone knows that. Everyone knows what they were told, Peggy corrected. But what if someone survived? What if they hid their child, bound her power so deeply it couldn't be detected, raised her in obscurity where no one would think to look? My parents, Myra whispered. Lady Deborah told me they died in an accident when I was an infant, that she took me in out of charity. Lady Deborah, Peggy said carefully, has been going to extraordinary lengths to keep you powerless. Why would she do that if you were just an ordinary orphan? The pieces began to fall into place, each revelation more impossible than the last. Myra's hand rose unconsciously to her throat, remembering the binding Peggy had described, remembering every punishment, every restriction, every time Lady Deborah had looked at her with something that might have been fear beneath the cruelty. She knew, Myra said. All this time, she knew what I was. And she tried to snuff you out before you could awaken, Harold added, his voice dark with controlled fury. The starvation, the abuse, all of it designed to keep you weak, to ensure you wouldn't survive the trial long enough for anyone to recognize what you are? But why? Myra looked between them desperately. Why would she care? The Luminaries were peacekeepers, weren't they? They used moonlight to heal, to protect. They weren't a threat. They weren't a threat, Peggy agreed quietly. Until the darkness came. Until something rose that could only be fought with pure light. The Luminaries were hunted because they were the only power that could stand against it. And if the darkness is rising again, then a Luminary awakening would be a very inconvenient problem, Harold finished grimly, for anyone aligned with that darkness. A chill ran down Myra's spine. You think Lady Deborah is working with something dark? I think, Harold said, rising and beginning to pace, that we need to find out exactly what happened to your parents. We need to know who bound your power and why. And we need to do it quickly. Because if Peggy's right about the timeline— I am, Peggy interjected. Then we have less than a week before you awaken, whether we're ready or not. Myra's hands had started to shake again, but this time not from weakness, from fear, from the overwhelming weight of revelations that had turned her entire existence upside down in less than a day. She wasn't human, she wasn't nobody. She was luminary blood, whatever that meant, carrying power that had been locked away since birth, and now that power was about to break free, and she had no idea what would happen when it did. I need to see Ellen, she said suddenly. My friend, the other servant. She knew Lady Deborah before I did. She might know something. I'll send for her, Harold said immediately. But Myra, you need to understand. You can't leave this tower until we know what we're dealing with. Someone tried to eliminate you once. If they learn you're still alive, still awakening, they'll try again. So, I'm a prisoner? You're protected, Harold corrected firmly. There's a difference. Myra wanted to argue, but exhaustion was already pulling at her despite the food, despite the revelations. Her body was still recovering, still weak from years of deprivation. She sank back into the pillows, hating how easily her strength gave out. Sleep, Peggy instructed gently. I'll bring your friend when you wake. But right now, your body needs rest more than anything else. Myra wanted to protest, wanted to demand answers, action, something to make sense of the chaos her life had become. But her eyes were already closing. And the last thing she registered before sleep claimed her was Harold's voice, quiet and fierce. I'll keep her safe. Whatever's coming, it goes through me first. Myra woke to whispers. Not threatening ones. These were urgent, familiar, and coming from just outside the door. She recognized Ellen's voice immediately, pitched with worry and barely controlled panic. "I need to see her, please. She's my friend. I need to know she's all right." The king gave explicit orders. "I don't care about orders. Myra is in there, and after what happened in the trial hall, I need to see with my own eyes that she's alive." The door opened. Ellen burst through it like a small storm. Her plain servant's dress rumpled, her soft face flushed with emotion and exhaustion. Her anxious eyes swept the room, landed on Myra in the massive bed, and she made a sound somewhere between a sob and a laugh. "Oh, thank the gods!" Ellen breathed, rushing to the bedside. "I thought, when you collapsed, when he carried you away, I thought, I'm okay," Myra said, though even she could hear how uncertain the words sounded. "Ellen, I'm okay." Ellen's hands hovered over Myra like she was afraid touching her might break something. "You don't look okay. You look like you've been through a war." Her eyes darted around the tower room, taking in the luxury, the guards visible through the half-open door, the evidence of royal attention. What is happening? The entire palace is in chaos. Lord Geoffrey is calling emergency sessions. Lady Deborah locked herself in her chambers and won't come out, and everyone is saying the Alpha King claimed you as his mate. "He did," Myra said quietly. Ellen's eyes went wide. "But how? Why? Myra, you're not—" She stopped herself, glancing at the guard near the door. "Not what?" Harold's voice came from the shadows near the fireplace. He'd been so still, Myra hadn't noticed him there, positioned where he could watch both the door and the bed. "Not good enough? Not highborn enough? Not worth claiming?" Ellen jumped, her hand flying to her chest. "Your Majesty, I meant no disrespect." "Ellen!" Myra caught her friend's hand, squeezing it. "It's all right. He's not going to hurt you. Harold, this is Ellen, the friend I mentioned." Harold moved out of the shadows, his presence filling the room despite the gentleness he was clearly attempting. "Ellen, Myra speaks highly of you. She says you knew Lady Deborah before Myra came into her household." Ellen's expression shifted from fear to something harder, more guarded. "I was her lady's maid. For 2 years before Myra arrived." "And what can you tell me about the night Myra came to live with her?" Ellen's gaze flicked to Myra, uncertain. "Your Majesty, I don't know if I should—" "Ellen, please." Myra sat up straighter, ignoring her body's protests. "I need to know. They think—" She took a breath. "They think Lady Deborah knew something about my parents, about what I am. Did she ever say anything? Anything at all about where I came from?" Ellen was quiet for a long moment, her face working through some internal struggle. Finally, she sank onto the edge of the bed, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "The night you arrived, I'd never seen Lady Deborah frightened before, but she was terrified that night." Ellen's fingers twisted in her skirt. "You were just an infant, barely a year old. 2 men brought you in the dead of night, hooded, speaking in low voices. I only heard fragments, but I remember them saying your parents were dead, that you were the last, that Lady Deborah had to keep you hidden, keep you weak, or they would come for you too." Myra's breath caught. "Who? Who would come for me?" "I don't know, they never said. But after the men left, Lady Deborah took you to the servants' quarters and told me you were to be raised as human. No special treatment, no education beyond basic literacy, nothing that would make you stand out, and absolutely no wolf training when you came of age." Ellen's voice hardened. "I asked her why. Why bring a baby into the house only to treat her worse than a stray dog? And she said—" Ellen stopped, her eyes filling with tears. "She said what?" Harold's voice was dangerously quiet. "She said it was the only way to keep you alive," Ellen whispered, looking at Myra. "That if anyone discovered what you really were, they'd kill you just like they killed your parents. So she had to make you invisible. Had to break you down until you were too weak, too ordinary, too nothing for anyone to notice." The words landed like blows. Myra had known Lady Deborah hated her, but this was something else entirely. This was calculated survival dressed as cruelty. She was protecting me? Myra's voice cracked on the words. By starving me? By beating me? By making every day of my life a living hell? I don't know if I'd call it protection, Ellen said bitterly. But I think in her twisted way, she believed she was. She told me once, years later, when she was deep in wine, that your mother had begged her to keep you safe. That Lady Deborah owed your mother a debt. But keeping you safe meant keeping you powerless, and the only way to keep you powerless was to destroy me slowly. Myra finished, her voice hollow. Harold moved then, crossing the room in 3 strides to crouch beside the bed. His hand covered Myra's where it rested on the silk sheets, warm and solid and real. Whatever her reasons, whatever debt she thought she owed, what she did to you was unforgivable. You understand that, right? Myra couldn't answer. Her mind was spinning, trying to reconcile years of abuse with the possibility that it had been twisted protection, that Lady Deborah had been afraid for her, not just of her. The men who brought her, Harold said, turning his attention to Ellen. Did you see their faces? Any markings? Or anything that might identify them? Ellen shook her head. They wore hoods and dark cloaks, but one of them, he had a ring, silver with a black stone. I remember because it caught the lamplight when he handed Lady Deborah a leather journal. He said it contained everything she needed to know about maintaining the binding. A journal, Harold repeated, his eyes sharpening. Does Lady Deborah still have it? I don't know. I never saw it again after that night. Harold stood, his expression grim with purpose. Then we're going to ask her, politely at first. His tone suggested the politeness was negotiable. Your Majesty? Peggy appeared in the doorway, her face drawn with concern. We have a problem. Reports just came in from the eastern villages. 3 settlements have gone dark. No messages, no trading caravans, nothing. And there are rumors of creatures in the woods, shadow things that drain the life from whatever they touch. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. How long ago? Harold demanded. First village went silent 4 days ago, the others within the last 48 hours. Peggy's gaze flicked to Myra meaningfully. The same timing as when the trial was announced, when word would have spread about the candidates. It's not a coincidence, Myra said quietly. Everyone looked at her. The attack started when I would have been identified as a trial candidate, when I would have been forced into public view. Someone's moving, Harold agreed grimly. Someone who's been waiting for you to surface. Ellen, did the men say anything else that night? Anything about who might be hunting Myra? Ellen's face had gone pale. There was one thing. Before they left, one of them turned back and said to Lady Deborah, "The darkness is patient. It's waited this long. It can wait until she ripens." I didn't understand what it meant. I do, Peggy said quietly. They were waiting for her power to mature. A luminary's abilities don't fully manifest until late adolescence. If they'd taken her as an infant, they'd have gotten a fraction of the power. But if they waited until she was 18, until the binding was ready to break naturally, they'd have access to a fully awakened luminary, Harold finished, his voice flat with controlled fury. Which means the attacks aren't random. They're a path. They're moving toward the palace. Toward me, Myra whispered. No. Harold's hand found hers again, his grip firm. Toward what they think is an unprotected girl, with no idea what she is or how to defend herself. They don't know you have me. They don't know we've discovered the binding. They think you're still vulnerable. I am vulnerable, Myra said. I don't know how to control whatever power I have. I don't even know what it does. Then we figure it out, Harold said simply. Peggy, how long before the binding breaks completely? Peggy moved to Myra's side, her healer's hands checking pulse points and examining Myra's eyes with practiced efficiency. The cracks are spreading faster. I'd say 3 days, maybe 4. After that, she awakens whether we're ready or not. Harold finished. And whatever is coming, it reaches the palace right around the same time. This is because of me, Myra said, horror dawning. Those villages. Those people. They're dying because of me. No. Harold's voice was sharp enough to cut through her spiraling panic. They're dying because something dark and evil is using you as an excuse to kill. That's not your fault. That's not your burden to carry. But if you weren't here, you'd be dead, and the darkness would still be killing people, probably more efficiently without anyone to stop it. Harold's golden eyes held hers, fierce and unyielding. Listen to me, Myra. Whatever is coming, whatever this thing wants with your power, it's been planning this for 18 years, probably longer. This isn't about you being a problem. This is about you being a solution they're trying to eliminate. Sure, a solution to what? To whatever they're trying to resurrect, Peggy said quietly. The Luminaries were destroyed because they were the only force that could stand against the Shadow Court. If the Shadow Court is rising again, then a Luminary awakening is their worst nightmare, Harold finished, which means we need to make sure you not only awaken, but awaken strong enough to fight. A knock at the door interrupted them. One of the guards stepped inside, his expression grim. Your Majesty, Lord Geoffrey is requesting an emergency council session. He says the eastern attacks constitute a national crisis and require immediate royal response. Harold's jaw tightened. Of course he does. Tell the council I'll meet them in 1 hour. The guard left, and Harold turned back to Myra. I have to deal with this. Geoffrey's going to use the crisis to undermine me, probably suggest I'm distracted by an inappropriate relationship while the realm burns. Standard political maneuvering. What do I do? Myra asked. You stay here. You rest. You eat. Harold's expression softened slightly. And you let Ellen stay with you. You shouldn't be alone right now. I'll stay, Ellen said immediately, her hand finding Myra's. For as long as she needs. Harold nodded, then paused at the door. Myra, whatever happens in the council, whatever Geoffrey tries to use against us, you're not a distraction. You're not a liability. You're the only real weapon we have against what's coming. Don't forget that. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a heavy finality. Ellen waited until the footsteps faded before turning to Myra with wide eyes. The Alpha King is protecting you. The realm is under attack, and you're apparently some kind of magical warrior made of moonlight. Myra, what in the gods' names is happening? Myra laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. I have absolutely no idea. 3 days ago, I was a servant who couldn't even afford to eat properly. Now I'm... She gestured helplessly at the tower room, at the situation, at everything. This! Well, Ellen said practically, if you're going to be a magical warrior made of moonlight, at least you're doing it in comfortable accommodations. These sheets are nicer than anything I've touched in my entire life. Despite everything, Myra smiled. This was why she loved Ellen, her ability to find something absurdly normal in the middle of catastrophe. But the smile faded as Myra's gaze drifted to the windows, to the darkness beyond. Somewhere out there, villages were dying, shadow creatures were hunting, and something patient and evil was moving closer with every hour. Waiting for her to ripen, waiting for her power to break free. And then what? What happened when the binding finally shattered? Would she become something powerful enough to fight back? Or would she lose herself entirely to a force she didn't understand? Ellen, Myra said quietly, if something happens to me, if I change into something that isn't me anymore. Stop! Ellen's grip on her hand tightened fiercely. You don't get to have a tragic sacrifice moment. Not yet. Not when we don't even know what we're fighting. But if it happens, we'll deal with it when it happens. Together. Ellen's voice was firm, despite the fear in her eyes. You didn't survive 18 years of Lady Deborah's hell just to give up now. You're stronger than whatever this is. You have to be. Myra wanted to believe her, wanted to feel that strength Ellen seemed so certain existed. But all she felt was afraid. The council chamber was exactly what Harold expected. A pit of vipers dressed in silk, all circling the scent of blood in the water. Lord Geoffrey stood at the center of the room like a prosecuting magistrate, his silver hair gleaming in the lamplight, his aristocratic face arranged in an expression of grave concern that didn't quite hide the satisfaction underneath. "Your Majesty," Geoffrey began the moment Harold entered, "thank you for joining us during this crisis. We've been discussing the situation in the Eastern Territories, and the Council has grave concerns about the pattern of attacks." "I'm sure you do," Harold said, moving to his seat at the head of the chamber. He didn't sit. "Let's hear them." Geoffrey gestured to a map spread across the central table. 3 villages, all targeted within days of each other. The attacks form a clear progression. Each one is closer to the palace than the last. By our calculations, whatever force is responsible will reach the capital city within a week. "And you have a theory about what this force is?" Harold asked, though he already knew where this was going. "Several theories, Your Majesty, none of them pleasant." Geoffrey's eyes glinted. "But there is one factor that correlates perfectly with the timing of the attacks." "The trial," Harold said flatly. "Precisely." Geoffrey's smile was cold. "So, the first village went silent the same night you claimed the Hawks girl. Some members of the council wonder if perhaps the two events are connected." "They're connected," Harold agreed, and had the satisfaction of watching surprise flicker across Geoffrey's face. "But not the way you're implying. Myra isn't causing the attacks. She's the target." That sent murmurs through the assembled councillors. Several leaned forward with interest. Councilman Peter, the older man who'd suggested the compromise, spoke up. "Target of what, Your Majesty?" Harold made a decision. These men needed to understand the stakes, needed to grasp that this was bigger than palace politics or proper procedure. "Myra Hawks is Luminary blood," he said, and the room erupted. "Impossible! The Luminaries are extinct." "Your Majesty, that's a dangerous claim without proof." "Enough!" Harold's voice cracked through the chaos like a whip. "The royal healer has confirmed it. The girl carries dormant power that's been bound since infancy, and something, has been waiting 18 years for that power to awaken so it can be harvested." "Harvested?" Peter's face had gone pale. "Your Majesty, are you suggesting the Shadow Court?" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you what we know. The attacks are targeted, they're calculated, and they're moving toward Myra because whoever is orchestrating them wants her power before she learns to control it." Geoffrey's expression had shifted from satisfied to calculating. "If what you say is true, Your Majesty, then the girl represents a significant danger to the realm. Luminary power is notoriously unstable during awakening. She could destroy half the palace if— "Which is why she needs proper support," Harold interrupted. "Not isolation, not fear, support. The mate bond provides an anchor during the awakening. It's literally the only thing standing between her and complete power collapse." "How convenient," Geoffrey said softly, "that the solution to this crisis requires you to complete a bond with a servant girl. One might almost think you engineered this situation to—" Harold moved faster than Geoffrey could track, closing the distance between them until he loomed over the councilman like a predator over prey. "Finish that sentence," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "and I will consider it a formal challenge to my integrity. And we both know how those end." Geoffrey held his ground, but something flickered in his eyes. Fear, quickly masked. "Your Majesty, I merely meant that the optics of the situation are unfortunate. The realm is under attack, and you're sequestered in a tower with a girl of dubious origins while villages burn. The villages aren't burning. They've gone silent, which means whatever took them wanted them intact." Harold stepped back, forcing himself to calm. "This isn't a military assault. It's a harvesting operation. Whatever this force is, it's consuming people to build strength for something bigger. And that bigger thing is a direct assault on this palace to claim Myra. Then give her up, Jeffrey said flatly. The room went dead silent. Excuse me? Harold's voice could have frozen fire. If the girl is truly the target, and the attacks stop when she's handed over, then we sacrifice one person to save thousands. It's a simple calculation. So, Your Majesty! Jeffrey's expression was perfectly reasonable, perfectly logical. One servant girl versus the entire Eastern Territory. The choice is obvious. The choice, Harold said, his voice dropping to something dangerous and feral, is that we don't sacrifice innocent people to monsters. Ever. Under any circumstances. And if you suggest it again, Jeffrey, I will have you removed from this council so fast you won't have time to pack your robes. Your Majesty. Furthermore, Harold continued, if Myra falls, if her power is taken, we lose the only weapon we have against what's coming. The Luminaries weren't hunted to extinction for sport. They were eliminated because they were the only force that could stand against the Shadow Court. Which means keeping Myra alive and helping her awaken safely isn't just about saving one girl. It's about saving the realm. Peter cleared his throat carefully. Your Majesty, no one here wants to sacrifice an innocent, but we need a plan. If these attacks reach the capital, if there's a siege on the palace itself, we need to be prepared. We are prepared, Harold said grimly. Double the guard on all entry points. Evacuate the eastern villages that are still intact and bring the refugees inside the city walls. And make it known that the royal palace is offering sanctuary to anyone fleeing the attacks. Whatever is coming, it finds a fortified position, not scattered vulnerable settlements. And the girl? Jeffrey pressed. What do we do about her? She stays protected. She awakens safely. And then we unleash her on whatever darkness is stupid enough to knock on our door. Harold delivered the words with absolute confidence, as if he wasn't desperately worried about what would happen when Myra's binding shattered, as if he had any real idea how to control an awakening luminary's power. But the council didn't need to know that. They needed to see strength, certainty, a king who had a plan, even if that plan was mostly, figure it out as we go and pray we don't all die. Dismissed, Harold said, turning toward the door. I want hourly reports on the Eastern Territories, and if anyone sees or hears anything about shadow creatures, black stone rings, or references to the Shadow Court, you bring it directly to me. No exceptions. He left the council chamber before anyone could mount further arguments, to his mind already racing through everything that needed to happen in the next 3 days. 3 days until Myra awakened. 3 days until whatever was hunting her reached the palace. 3 days to figure out how to save her, the realm, and possibly the entire future of their world. No pressure. When Harold returned to the tower room, he found Myra sitting up in bed, with Ellen curled beside her, both of them talking in low voices that cut off the moment he entered. How bad was it? Myra asked. Jeffrey suggested we hand you over to the monsters to make them stop attacking. Ellen made an outraged sound. Myra just looked tired. What did you say? She asked quietly. I told him I'd remove him from the council if he suggested it again. Harold moved to the chair beside the bed, suddenly exhausted. The weight of leadership, of impossible decisions, of trying to protect everyone while knowing he couldn't. It all pressed down like a physical force. You should consider it, Myra said. Both Harold and Ellen stared at her. What? Ellen grabbed Myra's arm. Myra, no. I'm serious, Myra interrupted, though her voice shook. If my being here is causing people to die, if villages are falling because something is hunting me, then maybe… No. Harold's voice was flat, absolute. We are not having this conversation. People are dying. People die in war, in conflict, in times of darkness. That's what this is. War. And you don't win wars by handing your weapons to the enemy. Harold leaned forward, his golden eyes intense. Listen to me, Myra. Your power is the only thing that can stop this. If we give you up, if we let them take you, then everything, everyone, falls. The sacrifice would be meaningless. You don't know that, Myra whispered. I do. Harold's hand covered hers, warm and solid. Because I've fought darkness before. I've seen what it does when no one stands against it. It doesn't stop with one village. It doesn't stop with one person. It consumes everything until there's nothing left but shadow. Your power, your light. That's what ends this. Not surrender. Never surrender. Tears tracked down Myra's face, silent and devastating. I don't know how to be what you need me to be. Then we learn together, Harold said simply. 3 days, Myra. 3 days until your power awakens. We use that time to prepare, to train, to make sure when the moment comes, you're ready. And if I'm not? Harold's expression softened. Then I stand beside you anyway. And we face whatever comes together. The word together seemed to settle something in Myra's expression. She nodded slowly, wiping at her tears with the back of her hand. Ellen cleared her throat. So, how exactly does one train to be a magical light warrior in 3 days? Is there a manual? A crash course? Despite everything, Myra laughed. A small, slightly broken sound, but genuine. I have no idea. Peggy does, Harold said. She's been researching Luminary abilities since last night. And there are archives, old texts from before the purges. We'll find everything we can. He stood, moving toward the door. But first, you need to rest. Real rest. Because starting tomorrow, we push hard. Harold? Myra's voice stopped him at the threshold. Thank you for not giving up on me. He looked back at her. This girl with tear-stained cheeks and trembling hands, this impossible person who'd survived 18 years of abuse and still had the strength to worry about saving others. Never, he said simply. I will never give up on you. Then he left to begin the impossible task of preparing for a war they barely understood, against an enemy they couldn't see, with a weapon they hadn't figured out how to use. But they had 3 days. And Harold Landry had never backed down from impossible odds before. He wasn't about to start now. The next 3 days blurred into a desperate race against time. Peggy brought ancient texts, their pages brittle with age, describing luminary abilities that sounded more like myth than reality. Light that could purify corruption, power that could heal or destroy depending on the wielder's intent. A connection to the moon itself that made them living conduits of celestial energy. Myra tried to access it, tried to feel something beyond the constant ache of the binding cracking deeper into her bones. But there was nothing except pain and the growing certainty that when the power finally broke free, it would consume her entirely. Harold stayed close, teaching her to breathe through the worst of it, his presence a steady anchor, even when everything else felt like chaos. The mate bond between them strengthened with each passing hour. She could feel his emotions now, taste his determination and fear in equal measure. Ellen brought news from the palace. Lord Geoffrey was gathering support, painting Myra as a threat that needed to be neutralized. Lady Deborah remained locked in her chambers, refusing all visitors. And the eastern attacks had accelerated. 5 more villages gone silent, the darkness moving faster now, as if it could sense time running out. On the 3rd night, under a sky where the winter moon hung full and merciless, the binding finally shattered. Myra felt it break like glass exploding inside her chest. Power erupted through her veins, blinding, burning. Too much and too bright, and too everything. She screamed, her body arching off the bed as light poured from her skin in waves. Harold was there instantly, his hands finding hers. The mate bond flaring to life like a lifeline thrown into storming seas. Myra! Focus on me! Focus on my voice! You're not alone in this! But the power kept building, kept rising. Out and through the windows, Myra could see them. Shadow creatures pouring across the palace grounds like a living tide of darkness, their hollow eyes fixed on the tower, where light blazed like a beacon. "They're here!" Peggy announced from the doorway, her voice remarkably calm. "Your Majesty, the breach." "I know." Harold's grip on Myra tightened. "Myra, listen to me. The bond can anchor you, but only if you accept it fully. Only if you choose this. Choose me. Not because you have to, but because you want to." Through the pain, through the chaos, Myra met his golden eyes. She could feel his terror for her, his fierce protectiveness, his absolute certainty that they could survive this together. And beneath it all, something deeper, something that felt like destiny recognizing itself. "Partnership," she gasped. "Not ownership, not control. Partnership." "Partnership," Harold agreed, and something in his expression cracked open, became vulnerable. "I love you. I don't know how or why it happened this fast, but I love you, and I will stand beside you, not above you, for as long as you'll have me." The words settled into her like a key finding its lock. Myra reached for the bond, reached for him, and felt the power shift. It didn't diminish. It focused, channeling through their connection instead of tearing her apart. Light exploded from the tower in a wave that lit the entire palace grounds. The shadow creatures shrieked, recoiling from the purifying radiance. And Myra felt herself change, felt the power integrate with who she was, instead of consuming her. She rose from the bed, light trailing from her hands like liquid moonfire. Through the windows, she could see the throne hall where the darkness had breached deepest, where Lady Deborah stood in the center of a summoning circle, her perfect composure finally shattered, her hands raised as she tried to control the very creatures she'd helped summon. "She betrayed us," Myra said, the words distant and strange in her own ears. "All along, she was working with them." "Then we end this," Harold said, his hand finding hers. "Together." They descended from the tower into a palace transformed into a battlefield. Shadow creatures swarmed the corridors, but they recoiled from Myra's light, hissing and dissolving like smoke in sunlight. Harold fought beside her, his shifted form a massive silver wolf that tore through anything her light didn't purify. The throne hall doors burst open beneath their combined assault. Lady Deborah stood at the center of her summoning circle, and for the first time in 18 years, Myra saw real fear in her guardian's eyes. Behind Deborah, the shadows coalesced into something massive and terrible, a manifestation of the darkness itself, hungry and ancient and wrong. "You were supposed to be weak," Deborah hissed. "You were supposed to be broken. I spent 18 years making sure. You spent 18 years teaching me to survive," Myra interrupted, light gathering in her palms. "You taught me endurance, resilience, the will to keep breathing even when everything hurts. And now I'm going to use every lesson you gave me to end this." She released the light. It didn't destroy the shadow creatures. It transformed them, burning away the corruption and revealing the stolen souls trapped within. One by one, they collapsed, freed from their torment. Even the massive darkness manifestation began to unravel, its form dissolving as Myra's power purified the very foundation of its existence. Lady Deborah tried to run, tried to escape through the shadows, but Myra's light wrapped around her like chains, holding her in place. "You killed my parents," Myra said quietly. "You bound my power. You made every day of my life a nightmare." "Why?" Deborah's laugh was bitter, broken. "Because I loved your mother. Because she was my friend, and the darkness took her anyway. They promised if I gave them you when you awakened, they'd bring her back. They promised." "They lied," Myra said. "The darkness always lies." The light intensified, and Lady Deborah screamed. But Myra wasn't killing her. She was doing something far more permanent. The light wrapped around Deborah's form, more crystallizing, transforming her into living prison. A statue of luminous crystal, that would hold her consciousness trapped and aware for eternity, unable to cause harm, but never able to escape the consequences of her choices. When the light finally faded, dawn was breaking over the palace. The shadow creatures were gone, purified or destroyed. The breaches were sealed, and Myra stood in the center of the throne hall, no longer a powerless servant, but something new, something powerful. The Luminary had awakened. Harold shifted back to human form beside her, his hand finding hers. Around them, the palace guard knelt, not in subjugation, but in respect. Even Lord Geoffrey, entering the hall with the council behind him, looked shaken into silence. "Your Majesty," Councilman Peter said carefully, "it appears the crisis has been, resolved." "It has," Harold agreed, "and I believe you all owe Myra an apology, and a crown." Myra looked at him, at this Alpha King who'd caught her when she fell, who'd protected her when she was vulnerable, who'd fought beside her when she finally found her strength. The mate bond hummed between them, warm and complete. "A crown?" she asked softly. "If you'll have it," Harold said, and despite everything they'd just survived, he looked nervous. "Partnership, remember? I can't rule this realm without you. I don't want to rule this realm without you." Myra looked around the throne hall, at the crystallized form of Lady Deborah, at the scorch marks from shadow creatures, at the dawn light streaming through shattered windows. This wasn't the life she'd imagined for herself, wasn't the future she'd dared to dream. It was so much more. Partnership, she agreed, and let Harold pull her close. "I accept." The realm had its queen. The darkness had been defeated. And Myra Hawks, who'd spent 18 years being told she was nothing, had finally discovered the truth. She was everything. Thank you for being here with us. If you enjoyed Myra and Harold's journey, please give this video a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments below. What was your favorite moment? Let us know. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more dramatic romance stories like this one. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Until next time, may you find your own strength in the darkness, and may love always catch you when you fall.